What's up, everybody? This is Andrew Krause, also known as D.R.U. That's D period R period U period. Today, I'm going to be going over a track of mine that is, as we speak, coming out in 4 days, but you'll see this video release the day that comes out on Blanco y Negro. So if you're here from hearing the track originally, I thank you and welcome you to my Music Theory Logic channel, where I both showcase music theory principles from my text linked below, in addition to explore some sound design and hopefully some other topics in the future. So, cool. Let's go ahead and look at the Logic session here. So we're going to be talking about The Future Is Yours. Again, this is a release off Blanco y Negro. Comes out September 18th, 2020. What a year. All right, cool. So this song is in the key of F minor. I'm just going to play it so that you can see the project file as things go by, and then I'm going to dive into some of the sound design and theory/arrangement of this piece. So here we go. Cool. Nice. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I hope you liked the song. If not, perhaps you can figure out how to make this into something that you do like from some of what I'm going to show you. All right, cool. So let's start with the principal chord progression. So we'll look at this here. Now, like I said, we're in the key of F minor. So essentially, this is an F minor chord. This is basically the same thing in F minor chord, but we add the note D flat. All right, you could also call that C sharp, but because in F minor we have a C, we'll refer to that note as D flat. All right, so that's a minor 1 chord. That's a minor 1 adding a 6, so a minor 6, you could call it. Minor 6th chord, that is. Then going to basically a minor 7th, the same chord, F minor 7th. That minor 7th is essentially on our bottom, that A flat, so that the E flat here is our minor 7th. A flat would be the second chord, so we'd say this isn't first inversion. So it's a minor 7th chord and then it's inverted. All right, moving on. This is a C major chord. Typically in F minor, this would be a C minor chord, but we use what's called the leading tone, this E natural, which makes this chord major. Subsequently, like this whole key would be called F harmonic minor, which basically refers to an F minor scale with a raised 7th scale degree. Again, fancy word for that is a leading tone. Cool. So that chord progression basically covers like the first half of the song. Then after that first drop, we get sort of an uplifting feel. That comes from going to the relative major, which of F minor. Any minor key, the relative major is always going to be the 3rd. So that's an A flat in this key. So we go to A flat major next. Chord progression is really similar. I'll address that just so you know what's happening. The first 2 chords are essentially the same. Then we go to an A flat major chord, where before we add that, we have that A flat, which is part of like our F minor 7th. So we change that to an A flat major chord. It's even an A flat major 7 as made by that G natural. And then moving on, we've got an E flat major chord, and that's our 5 chord. So essentially this is like, if we're talking about it in the key of A flat major, this is gonna be like a 6 chord into a 1 chord into a 5. Or if we're still thinking about it in the minor key, it's a 1 into a 3 into a 7. So yeah, there we go. Let's talk about the melody. So I'll play it while we look at it. Cool. So basically what most of the notes I'm using, I'm going F, A flat, F, 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 A flat. So those are 2 notes from the F minor chord. Again, these first 3 measures, we're doing some form of an F minor chord. So that's why it works. So that's basically just like 2 notes from the chord with an interesting rhythm, some sort of syncopation, if you will, with where these last notes happen. And then finally over the C major, nothing fancy. We're doing a C major arpeggio. We're going C, G, E. So those are the 3 notes in our C major chord that we had over here. All right, cool. Nice. Let's talk about some of the sound design stuff. This vocal chop is a serum patch I made. You should always name your stuff. Future is yours, vocal chop. All right, cool. So the main thing that I'm doing here is I'm using this noise oscillator, which you can also use as a sample player. I cover that in like the video where I build 808s or my Serum Fundamentals videos. So you can go into your Serum preset folder, which you can find within that. You could go into noises, user, and then you could add some of your own sounds. Important note, they have to be wave files, I believe. Cool. So that's one thing that's happening. Then I am basically using LFO1 as an envelope to bring in this step down oscillator in addition to moving its wavetable position. And then I have it cranked up all the way to 16 voices. So full blasting unison. And then finally, I have a second envelope, which is, if you look, basically the same. By having 2 different ones, you get a little bit of subtle variation. It adds more like unique elements to your sound, so that's always helpful. And that's tied to our oscillators B, which is a cymatics waveform called Blaze. Looks like we're using the 3rd oscillator to control our filter and our wavetable position of oscillator B. All right, let's look at our effects chain. So we have a chorus. That is basically not doing anything. Perhaps I use that in the next sort of rendition of the sound as it evolves. Moving on to our compressor, we're doing some parallel compression. So that means if this mix knob were blasted all the way to 100, we'd be hearing purely a compressed signal. So by not having it at 100, we're hearing a blend of the non-compressed signal and the compressed signal. Anytime we do a blend of an affected signal and an unaffected signal, we call that parallel processing. So that's what's happening there. This reverb, I'm using a plate reverb. It's not changing at all. And then finally, I have, it looks like a harmonic or a specific band within the EQ that stays the same this whole sound, and the gain is controlled by that LFO3. So not a super crazy sound. We have nothing happening in the main matrix. Cool. So that basically brings up the whole sound. Our oscillator or our filtering's happening just on these two oscillators, so kind of bringing in those sounds. And the main part of this sound is this vocal sample in the noise oscillator. One important thing to note is that this key mode, that's key tracking. What that means is that the sample will change when the note that you're playing changes. So for this sound, that's really important. This is a one-hit sound, which means it'll, like, if you trigger a sample, it'll play the whole thing, and it'll only play it once. But basically I'm using a pluck type attack. Now, one interesting thing is, like, you can use the envelope, or you can make an LFO an envelope. So in this example, I'm using the LFO as an envelope. This is something that I saw Kill the Noise. Shout out to Jake Kill the Noise, who was showcasing building like 808s, and he was using LFOs instead of the envelope. He was saying that gives you more control, and it's basically just the same thing in slightly different representation. The LFO advantage is that we have a little bit more controls, and we can also customize it a lot more to give it some flavor. Cool. So that covers this verse section. I guess I should talk about the drum layer. So again, future bass, I found this to be like a super helpful thing to do with our percussion stack. So I have all a rim shot and two percussion sounds that are all going to one channel, a stack, which basically just allows me to control those three sounds as one entity in the mix, which is always helpful. Just limits the amount of work. All right, our bass, I'm using a Razor-based sub. It's called Punch in the Balls. It's one of my favorite, just like clean subs to use. Nothing fancy really is happening here. We are doing a rhythm that you'll see basically repeats every other measure. And that would be referred to as our rhythmic phrasing. So keeping that consistent helps. And then these actual notes, those are root notes, or the lowest notes of our actual chord progression. So that's the 1, that's the 6, that's the 3, and that is the 5. One, I guess, side note is we use one note that's not in our chord at the very end. That's the minor 6. That just gives us a cool little like walk-up sound at the end of that. All right. Cool. I'm using what is that? The forgetting what it's called. The Isotope Iris 2. I fell in love with that synth for really using like for pad type sounds and keys. I'm working on a remix right now for a Kill Paris remix contest that I'm using Iris for creating some trippy like keyboard pluck sounds. Cool. So I guess the main part of the next section, the drums that really catch your ear, that's a contact player by a smaller company called Heaviosity that's called Damage. This has been something I've been using since I started this alias, and if you go back to listen to like one of my first tracks, Sway, you'll hear it in the build-up. They're basically like movie toms. They sound super heavy and cool. There's individual like drum machines and sample players in it. Highly recommend checking that out. Then I'm using some other Iris stacks for some big chords, as you see that there. Then I think the next cool part to talk about is our orchestral elements. So I use a lot of east-west instruments in my television compositions, and pretty much anything I'm writing that I want to sound like an organic or a real instrument that you could identify. So like a violin or a tuba or a brass section, and that's what we have here. I'll play them all together. So we've got a really soft French horn type sound. Violin, kind of a tremolo sound. And then low brass, which is it's like a tuba section. So those layers sound like this. Cool. Now the main money section in that buildup is this like big room chop is what I'm calling it. This was a pretty fun thing to do. You'll notice it's almost like the same exact channel as I had before. Let's compare these two. All right, it's almost the same channel I had before, but we're turning on the sub. We turned off our noise oscillator. That is what was playing the actual vocal sound. So the vocal sound goes away. We have the same envelope sort of stuff that is happening, only we're adding in this Blaze oscillator, and notice we turned up the unison to 16 voices. So that's basically any sound that you have. If you drag up the unison, it's going to start to sound like that, big room house, sort of like giant. In that world, they call it a super saw. If you actually use the initial sound that comes with Serum and you crank up the unison to 16, maxing out your voices, that's essentially going to make that initial preset sound like a pretty generic, like big room house, super saw build-up lead. Cool. Then I guess what's important to note, the build-up section, it's 8 bars. That's pretty useful if you DJ, because a lot of these tracks are going to have the same sort of build-ups. This note, that's just a sampler from our damage instrument. Everything else is our 1 chord or F minor. So on a build-up, to create tension, holding the 1 chord is a really common thing that happens. You probably heard that a ton. Then I'm basically bouncing in place my damage sounds, and then I'm looping that and subdividing. Then vocal pad delay. This sound, I took the vocal pad sound that happens at the beginning and in the former section, and I added what sounds like, I guess, an 1/8 note delay or a 1/4 note delay. I turned up the feedback so that it would go for a while, and then I bounced in place. I'm then sampling that audio. It's a great method for using delays, especially if you're going to do crazier things. It'll both make it easier on your computer, not having to do that processing live, but it also helps out a lot and just giving you more control. Like instead of automating a filter that is built within a delay, I could say just EQ the actual delay, which I am doing. I'm cutting off the lows, it looks like. Cool. Now it looks like I keep that delay sound going on through the drop. So let's listen to the drop. Nice. I love that second section of the drop. I wanted to put that right from the beginning, but side note, sometimes placement is key. I think that feels better after we get the sort of crazy 808 driven chop drop sound. It kind of lets us settle into the texture, and then it fills in more. Cool. So the drop lead MIDI is actually the same thing that I had going on before, which is always guaranteed to make it sound familiar, right? Since it is literally familiar, the same thing. Cool. Then what's interesting about this, so you could say all three of these lead sounds I tried to like make organic in the sense that each one is built from the other. So we have that vocal chop. The vocal chop goes away, and the voices is dragged up to 16 on both oscillators, so 32 in total. That gives it the like big room house sound. We keep those number of voices up. Looks like we basically start doing a lot of different stuff with our LFO. So you'll remember before we had an envelope that was just going down. Now we have it going down and up. We're tying it to a half note, and it's also controlling some more. This is a FM synthesis that's happening down here. So FM is a really great synthesis technique to use for anything that you want to sound like abrasive or edgy. You get a lot of like harmonic rich and transient rich content when you use that kind of modulation. Cool. I guess another thing that's happening is that LFO1 is tied to both oscillators volumes, as opposed to before we were using a different one each time. Cool. Moving along, our LFO3 is still controlling that wavetable position. Nice. We got a lot more of affecting going on. One, that dimension expander that will help. I believe we're automating that. Our chorus we're going to bring in a little bit of delay just to fill out the space. Our compression, still parallel compressing. Reverb switched from a plate to a hall reverb. And then our EQ, we changed this. This is kind of interesting. So we lowered down that harmonic that we're bringing out, what looks to be probably the fundamental. That will help a lot. And then we've got our filtering. We're doing a flange, phase 12 plus, and then I'm using this 60th note quick movement to automate the cutoff. So let's look at the patch while that plays. One other important thing is that the frequency for where that EQ peak is tied to our note source knob, and basically what that does is it will take into account the note you're playing and change where that frequency is. That's important so that the note changes with how we want it to. Like the MIDI note is changing, and if we didn't have that tied, then a lot of the notes would change, but then we'd be still accenting the same frequency, which would be kind of strange to do. Cool. Then cymbals for you Logic people. This is a great technique. So I'm using the EXS24. Nothing fancy. This is the same hi-hat I used in my track on Wicked Records from years ago that was called Disorder. You can still hear that on my Spotify. Basically, it's just a single sample of a closed hi-hat that is dragged in. You do that, on a side note, by hitting edit, and then you drag the sample in, and the key you hit here, like B2, that B2 is the home note or the main sample that we're playing. Cool. And then let's look at our MIDI. Basically, the reason to do this is so that you can use MIDI to then control a sample. This gives you a lot more control, and you can do things like pitching things up and down. You can have different velocities, which adds more of a human element. Cool. So if we click here to just look at our velocities, you'll notice that it's dragging up. That makes it get louder and louder. we have basically 30-second notes, right, happening in the beginning, going to 2/8 and then 16ths. It looks like this pattern repeats every other measure. Cool. Side note, the 808 channel, I think the 808 fills a huge part of this track. Let's listen to just this. Cool. So first of all, that percussion layer adds a lot. You'll notice we bring out our other percussion that we had, but we do have the same percussion channels that happen in the beginning of the song happening during the drop. They go away and this new percussion layer comes in. The part I wanted to show you was this 808 and the fill section. So back to the EXS 24. One great thing to do. Oh, sorry, there's our 808 fill. So anytime you're working with a sample-based 808, which I'm sure a lot of you are because they're plentiful, there are probably tens of thousands of 808 audio samples available to producers out there. So if you are using a sample-based 808, and it's maybe you only have one note and one sample, and you want to add some variation, you don't want to just repeat that one note. So what do? In Ableton, you can load that into like a sampler. And in Logic, our sampler is this EXS24. Again, you hit the edit window, you drag it in. Then it's important to note that you're going to want to change this key thing right here. So notice I set it to F1. That means the F at the first octave. The reason I did this is that this first 808 sound is an F. The reason we want to make sure that's an F is so that when I draw in these MIDI notes, they're actually correct. Because you could imagine, since we set it F is F, so that means C is a C. However, if we were to set F as G, right, that means this note would actually be a D up higher. So what we see isn't what we get, which we sort of want what we see to be what it is, so we can use our music theory knowledge. Cool. So the actual notes we're playing is basically a C arpeggio. We're over a C major chord. We're going C and then G, C, E, G. All those notes are in our C major chord. Another reason you want to load the 808s into samplers so that you can pitch bend them. So down here is our pitch bend wheel automation. So the pitch is going down. That is a super crucial part of this whole drop sound. It gives it a lot of unique elements, or it gives it kind of like an identity, some dissonance, if you will. And so it bends down and then it does this quick eighth note fill. That's this section. Which I think really helps a lot to give this track a lot more movement than it would if I just played like one 808 note the whole time. Cool. So what some of you may have been waiting for is this drop section 2. Cool. So let's go to this drop lead. All right. This is a fun sound. I actually haven't used it. I called it I am D.R.U. I'm D.R.U. That literally is a recording of me through this mic saying I am D.R.U. I then imported that using that knob into an oscillator window, and then I did some things like processing, and I think I normalized, and then I did crossfade against each one, and then I did I sort of deleted wavetables. It looks pretty sharp and an interesting sound. So that's the basis of the wavetable that we're using, and then we're basically just moving through the wavetable position. If you say a word, like a phrase, into this, and then you drag it into the oscillator, as you move through the wavetable, that is going to basically be like the audio that you put in. So that's doing just part of it. Pretty simple. There's literally like nothing else happening in there. Cool. So hopefully that shows you it doesn't have to be very crazy. Again, that's like one of my favorite parts of this drop. Cool. We're going to talk about this section now. This is the part I was saying is basically major progression now. Cool. So let's talk about what that means. Again, I showed you those chords before. So first of all, relative scales basically mean that they're the same scales. They're just focused around a different note from the pattern of 5 or 7 notes that our other scale has. What that means is that F minor has the exact same notes as A flat major. So what's the difference if that's the case? Well, music in A flat major is going to usually start or end on chords that are important to A flat major, and F minor is going to start and end on chords important to F minor. So our first section has all F minor chords and variations, and then a C major, that's the 5 in F minor. In A flat, that would be like the 3rd, so a less important chord. And then here we're starting with our F minor chord again, but then we do A flat to E flat, and A flat, if we're thinking A flat major, would be like our main chord, our 1, and then E flat is a 5 chord. That's sort of like a parallel or the same thing harmonically that's happening in the minor key in the relative major. So our last chord in the other sections is C major. That's a 5 in F minor. And then in our next section, we get an E flat, which is a 5 in A flat major, which is sort of like the same thing. If you're following me, hopefully you think that's interesting. If not, thanks for bearing with me. Similar stuff is happening there. All right, let's look at the final drop. So I wanted to do something that wasn't just like the same thing twice. I always like to do that in my tracks. I've also really fallen in love with trying to do things that are like 2 different energies. So something that's like really dark and optimistic in one track, or angry yet hopeful, like different contrasting sort of emotions. So in the second drop, like once we do the break section and we're in A flat major, we fundamentally stay in A flat major. We get those chords underneath. Let's look at our drop melody. So our drop melody, where we were repeating F, A flat, F, we go up to our C. So what is that? That's the 3rd of our main A flat major chord. So that's helpful. And then the final one, we go C, G, up to F. So we're basically varying our melody. And over here, this is an E flat major chord that we're using. And these notes come from our E flat major. That note is 9 to E flat major, or suspended second. That adds some cool, I don't know if tension's the right word, but a different color in that melody. Cool. So let's hear that section. Cool. So there it is. I hope this I hope this was helpful for you. Again, as I was trying to figure out how to make this kind of music, I really wished a lot of my favorite tracks or my favorite artists sort of did these kind of videos showing their songs. Shout out to Virtual Riot. He really like changed the game, I think, for a lot of all of us out there making bass music or watching tutorials. So I don't claim to be on his level, but I've studied his videos to try to better myself. And if I can impart any information that helps you guys or helps you to better understand my music, happy to do so. So if you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications to stay up on future content that I make. Again, I am here as both a teacher for this YouTube channel, Music Theory Logic, and today I was here as my artist alias, D.R.U. If you want to learn about other production techniques that pertain directly to bass music, future bass, dubstep, or hip-hop, general pop music, you can, again, subscribe or hit the bell to find that other content. I'm doing a lot of things from building sounds and showing you how to build those, to recreating popular songs to better understand the music theory in there, and then just covering some random songwriting and producing concepts and techniques that I've found helpful. So anyway, feel free to shoot me an email if this was helpful, or leave me a comment. If you want me to cover anything that I did in this video more in-depthly, just let me know. I hope this was helpful. Till next time.